Hello and welcome. I am live from Pellam's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads for you all, this time covering Nightmare Town by Dashiell Hammett. Nightmare Town is a collection of short stories by Hammett, who wrote both a number of short stories and a handful of novels, maybe more than a handful. Um, Many of the novels were originally serialized in similar publications to the short stories. So there's kind of an interesting overlap there. This particular collection includes a number of stories with characters that are familiar from some of the other stories of those particular characters, whether novels or short stories. In particular, two of the standouts are the anonymous Continental Op or operator for the Continental Detective Agency, who is our protagonist of Red Harvest, the novel, and is also the lead detective in a number of stories in here, as well as Sam Spade, who is famously the protagonist of the Maltese Falcon, played by Humphrey Bogart in the I think most famous version of the movie, although there's another movie adaptation, if I remember, of the Maltese Falcon in particular, which is kind of an interesting quirk of history. But yeah, Dashiell Hammett worked in a number of different jobs in his youth before eventually becoming a detective for the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and then was sort of disillusioned eventually, especially in the introduction. There's talk about basically a operations against organized labor, and the way that that kind of gradually disenfranchised Dashiell Hammett in the idea of working as a detective. And then he ended up, of course, needing to support himself, and so started writing these stories that are detective stories, but with a bent that is designed to have kind of a more grounded flavor, to reflect his own experiences on some level. And also, he is quoted in the introduction as talking about that this is not just grounded, but that his detectives, as he saw them, are the kind of detectives that many detectives that he knew would like to be. That this is not Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot or any number of other this kind of ideal of the sort of gentleman detective. This very kind of clever, puts it all together behind the scenes, and then takes everybody into the room where the murder happened, but there was no entry or exit, and shows them how the clever things went off. And that his protagonists are not really like that. Most of them solve crimes as much by brute force as anything, basically. That the Continental Op in particular, I think most of his stories involve him utilizing his resources effectively, and basically demonstrating kind of what detective as a profession instead of detective as a sort of romanticized ideal are like. That he spends a lot of time just sort of talking to people and working out problems and putting together information, a lot of it just by kind of legwork, going to different, the scene of the crime and talking to different witnesses or different people who knew the victims or the suspects or whatever else, as opposed to this kind of unrealistic ideal of the detective in fiction, like I mentioned, from Sherlock Holmes or Poirot, are the sort of two examples that come to mind. And I think that's part of why this is really fun. Dashiell Hammett was famous. This kind of style, this change of style, being the beginning of the hard-boiled detective. This idea of the detective as a tough dude. He's a strong, he's a cool customer, a hard operator, whatever you want to describe, and he, doesn't get hoodwinked by people who want to hoodwink him, and he can get into a fight and dish out punches if he needs to. But he's also clever, and he's smart, but not like a necessarily a learned character. All that sort of stuff, all sorts of stuff that I think by now, um it often, I mean, we have seen a number of detective stories that all, I think, try to capture this feel on one level or another. A lot of, I think, modern crime fiction takes a number of kind of cues from this idea of, the sort of seedy underbelly, where there's all these kind of different factions, but also there's like a real, undercurrent of violence, and there's this, kind of non-romanticized aspect of crime and all that sort of stuff. And I yeah, I think that's really cool. And it's really cool to see Dashiell Hammett, not just kind of an innovator within detective fiction in terms of creating all these things, but also a really talented story writer in his own right. These are really very like excellent stories, most of them. A lot of them have, cool twists and turns. There's all sorts of, hidden motives that become clear. There's um, the fun mystery elements are still present, even if they are stylistically handled a little differently. And I think that's part of why I like this collection so much also is that because so there are 20 stories in this collection, and because they span a number of different periods of Hammett's career, even though his writing career was not that long, um, they touch on different periods and different characters, and they really show the breadth of kind of his detective fiction in general. That you have the titular story, Nightmare Town, which is sort of a detective story, but our character isn't really a detective. He's sort of a traveling ne'er do well, I guess. And there's this, kind of seedy underbelly conspiracy type stuff going on. But then you also have all these continental ops stories where the operator is figuring out how to solve crimes and solve problems. But then you also have, I mentioned there's I think three Sam Spade stories, and the Sam Spade stories are really interesting because he, in some ways, I think bridges the gap between a character like the Continental Operator, who is very unromanticized in a lot of ways, versus Sam Spade, who is definitely much more of a hard-boiled character than, say, Sherlock Holmes, but he also has more of the idea of the gentleman detective than some of these other protagonists in these Dashiell Hammett stories. In particular, I think, where the Continental Op is mostly solving crimes by hard work, basically. Sam Spade also works hard, but he definitely has, maxed out his charisma, right? He's slick, and he's good at talking to people and getting people to tell him what he wants to know, and is, not going to get hoodwinked by anybody telling him a fake story and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's really cool to see that kind of difference, that you have a much more kind of, I guess, really grounded version of these stories of, the Continental Op, like I said, as um, a grounded problem solver detective, a tradesman detective, for lack of a better term, basically. But then the Sam Spade stories are so much fun because he is such a fun character to read about, because he's, slick and clever and charismatic, and is able to get people to tell him what he wants to know and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that's really fun. It's not the last stories, but it's late in the collection are the three Sam Spade stories, and I thought they came at a great place in the collection because it was really fun to not necessarily close with those, but to have those as kind of near the end, closing up. The last story in particular is a early draft of what would become The Thin Man, which was published, I believe, as a novel, and then also was adapted into a movie, maybe multiple times. I don't remember for certain, but it was the last big thing that Hammett published under his own name, although he worked with a playwright for a number of years afterwards and was involved in her work on some level, but never published anything under his own name, as far as according to the introduction, I guess, as I remember it. Um, so yeah, this kind of brings us to sort of the end of his writing career. But yeah, I think this is a really fun collection. I think if you like this type of hard-boiled detective, honestly, if you like basically any crime fiction, I think you owe it to yourself to check this out because this is a really fun collection of stories. Dashiell Hammett, great writer. If you have not read The Maltese Falcon and Red Harvest, also both of those are really good. Um, but Nightmare Town is definitely a collection that deserves a spot on the shelf to be read if you have not read any other Dashiell Hammett, or even if you have but haven't read the stories in this collection. Um, it, I think, comes to right about 400 pages in print. I think it was a little longer on ebook edition, but yeah, 400 pages or so of some quality Dashiell Hammett hard-boiled detective storytelling. Um, and his characters are, getting into trouble and getting out of it and figuring out all sorts of nasty things that are going on that people don't want them to figure out. But it's great, super super fun, totally worth reading if you are at all interested in that type of crime fiction. Anyway, that is going to be it for me for today. Hopefully, my microphone has continued to sound better. I think I mentioned in the last one, I've been having a couple of minor issues with the mic, but hopefully, it sounds good. Otherwise, um, leave a comment down below if you have read any Dashiell Hammett, and especially if you have liked. I guess if you didn't like the Dashiell Hammett you read, you feel free to leave that sort of comment as well, even though that will probably make me sad because I really like Dashiell Hammett's writings. But yeah, leave a comment, like and subscribe, and all of that. Yeah, I've been live from Pellam's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.